All right, now we are ready. So again, for everybody who is joining us, for whom this is their first one, welcome to the Career Conversations Book Club. Good to have you join us. Reminder of the reason why this book club was started. One is for a love of books and reading that I have. Another is for powerful career conversations. And the other is to bring people together in the community, even if it's virtual for the time being. And so I am really glad that you are here with us today, whether it's later on or in the at present. And if you'd like to share any of the commentary that we have, please feel free to use the hashtag GA Career Conversations. So before we get started with Heidi, I know you're here to hear from her. So before we get started with Heidi, I just want to do some preliminary reminders for all of us. The format, we're going to hear from Heidi about her career first, and then we're going to dive into the book, and then we're going to open it up to you for questions that you might have or comments that you might have. So sort of an equal third split between a conversation about Heidi, the book detailed with questions, and then any comments or interactions that you want to have in the latter part. So in the meantime, if you could, I ask that you please keep your microphones muted. Feel free to ask things in the chat or make comments in the chat until the last sort of 30 minutes. I might ask some questions in the chat, so be aware of it as well, because we do want to have you engaged if you can. And we'll be recording the session, as I've already mentioned, and people can be watching it afterwards if they are interested to do so. For anybody who is an Ontario lawyer, you are able to claim 1.5 hours of professionalism credit towards your CPD, whether you are dealing with this live or whether you are watching the recording. And the last thing I wanted to remind all of us, you've gotten the notice with regards to the kind of safety that we want to have within this conversation. And I love that in her book, in your book, Heidi, you had little life jacket or the safety zone for various areas. And I think it's really important for us to understand that this is intended to be a space where we are, and I'm using the words of Elisa Hancora, safe, but also an accountable space. We are here and responsible for our actions and for the engagement that we have within the conversation. So I welcome everybody's engagement, and I do ask that you're all accountable for the interactions and the engagement. So without any further ado, I am super delighted to have Heidi K. Brown join us this afternoon. I'm going to stop sharing the, there we go. I'm going to stop sharing the slide just for a moment. Heidi, welcome this evening. I'm delighted to speak with you. A lot of the reason why people are interested, not just in the book, but also in the author herself. And so what I wanted to do was ask you to tell us a little bit about your journey. And I'm going to use your own words. You've had an incredible, in my mind, career story right now. And as you said in the ending, you say that we are all, including yourself, multidimensional, multifaceted, multi-layered, and multi-nuanced. I love that quote. And for yourself, and I wonder if it's changed at all, you currently at that time defined yourself as a writer, a fighter, a passionate U2 fan, a world traveler, a proud introvert, and of course, a teacher to awesome law students. So can you share with us what you think are some of the personal highlights of your career journey, how and why you started and shifted at the different stages? Over to you, please.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. Even just hearing those words that you just said and reminding me of the little life preserver icon in the book, it takes me back to the process of writing the book, which is something that's just a process that I love. So thank you for giving me that memory. Yes, so my career has been kind of a circuitous one, which is really, I find it hilarious because when I went to law school straight out of college. I was 21 when I went to law school. I had no idea what I was doing. And I graduated when I was 24, and I thought my life was going to be join a law firm, stay there forever, make partner, and that was my life. That is not exactly how it went. So I'll just give you a little bit of a snippet of kind of how I operate. So as I share in the book, law school was really tough for me. I loved college and I was a very good college student, but I really struggled in law school, mainly because of the performance, the performative aspects of it, the outward expression. Loved the research and writing. My grades in law school weren't that great my first year, but I needed a job. I needed a paying job in the summer. So I sent out 100 resumes. And I'm kind of scrappy that way. Like if I want something, I will just make sure that I have a process. And so I sent out 100 resumes, and I got a job in my first summer at a firm that just happened to specialize in construction litigation. Now, I didn't really know what those two words meant put together when I got the job, but I ended up working there both my summers in law school, and then they offered me a permanent job after I graduated. So I worked at that firm for 6 years. I thought, again, I was going to stay there forever, but I was also married and very young, right out of law school at 24, and with the same person for a total of 12 years. And our relationship fell apart a lot because I was working so much, to be honest with you. And so 6 years into my career, I left Virginia. I was working in Virginia, and I wanted to move to New York. And so I had to start completely over. And so what did I do? I left everything behind. My house, my relationship, my job, my friends, everything. It was really a traumatic time in my life, but I needed a job again. I sent out another 100 resumes. This time I landed a job in Big Law, a huge law firm in New York, which I never could have gotten right out of law school. But because I had 6 years of really intense experience, I was eligible. So I reinvented myself. I got a job in Big Law. This is kind of a dramatic part of my life story, but I was working in the World Trade Center, and 9/11 happened. I was not there that day. That story is, I think, in that book. It's definitely in some of my books. And I had to reinvent myself again. I actually, my flight was diverted to Canada, which is a really interesting part of my 9/11 experience. I'm very grateful to the Canadians for taking care of 39 planes full of people in Gander, Newfoundland. So I reinvented myself again when I got back to New York. Luckily, everyone in my firm was okay, but the firm relocated to Midtown. I didn't want to go back. So I went and started working for a small firm. So fast forward, because I know this is getting kind of long. For the small firm, I was again working as a construction lawyer, and we had a huge case out in California. So I moved from New York to California because we really needed all hands on deck for this particular case, which was going to take like 3 years to go to trial. While I was in California at the gym, a woman came up to me and she said, I know you're a writer, you're a legal writer, that's your specialty. There's a law school in Southern California that's looking for a legal writing professor. You should apply. So I did, and I didn't get the job. So I thought, okay, not meant to be right now. I was crazy busy working on that case. Friday, late August, the dean of the law school calls me and says, hey, so I didn't get the job. They took a person who had more teaching experience than I did. I had never taught before. But the Friday before the new semester was going to start, the dean called me and said, we admitted too many students. We need another legal writing professor. Can you start on Monday? And I thought, I don't know what I'm doing. I have no syllabus. I have no textbook. I've never taught anything in my life. But I said yes. And so I walked into my classroom. I was a nervous wreck. And I taught that first year while I was still practicing law, which I highly do not recommend. I was so exhausted. But that launched my teaching career. I stayed in that teaching role for 3 years while I was still sort of working, not full time, but almost. I missed the East Coast. I moved back to New York. I got another job teaching, and I was still like freelance legal writing for the law firm at that time, but I had really pared back my legal work. And then I stayed at that school for 3 years. A position to direct a legal writing program opened up at another school. I applied to that. I got it. And that's when I really started writing. I wanted to write about introversion and fear, and I can talk a little bit about the progression of the books, but that turned me into a published author and a public speaker, which I also find hysterically funny because I was the introvert with extreme public speaking anxiety that now suddenly had this international platform, and I was running around the world doing talks. And 10 years ago, that would have terrified me. So long story short, I just changed jobs again. So my career has been 3 law firms, 3 law schools, and I just returned to the middle school. So the second school where I ever taught, I left there and went away to another school, but now I'm back at that one, and I'm in the job of a lifetime. I'm creating, I'm speaking, I'm writing, and I taught my first class of the new semester yesterday, and I think it went okay. So that's my journey.
I am sure. Okay, and just so that others know, the new role, because you've just started very, very recently. Tell us a little bit about the new role, because I think it's an exciting role because it's unique to most of the law schools in North America. So tell us about the new role, Heidi.
Yes, definitely. And then remind me, because I have another rejection story that turned out to be amazing, a gift in disguise. So the last 7 years, I've been directing a writing program at a different school where I focused mostly on the first year program. And in the United States, the first year curriculum is pretty well regulated, and it's pretty intense. And so I've been teaching that for 14 years. At this school, I teach at New York Law School in Tribeca in Manhattan in New York. And my dean, who I love so much, his name is Anthony Crowell. He and his colleagues designed this role for me to be associate dean for upper level legal writing, and to really have a blank slate to create an upper level curriculum that builds on the first year curriculum, so students can really continue their journey developing as a writer. And what I've spent all summer researching is the concept of writer identity formation. I found this professor named Roz Ivanich wrote this great book called Writing and Identity. And I'm working on infusing that into legal education, and also dipping my toe into the water of generative AI, because it's out there, and we gotta figure this out. And I want to teach that and incorporate that into legal writing education in an ethical and responsible way.
I
So
love
that's
it.
what I'm doing now.
Oh, congratulations on that. Your students are lucky to have you. And can I ask you the question, with the last position, Sandra, I agree, a big applause for Heidi. With the last position, is it something that you worked with your current dean to develop, or was it something that they said, hey, you know what? This is what we need in a law school. Heidi, you'd be a great person for it. Come on board. How did that work out?
So my last position, I'm trying to think. So it was 7 years ago. I actually, this is funny. I applied for that job 8 years ago, and I didn't get it.
For the same role.
Same thing. I applied for this director job at this particular school, and they were looking for somebody, again, who had already had director experience, who was already on a tenure track. And I was not a tenured law professor. I was not even on a tenure track at my prior job before that one. And so I think they just wanted somebody who had more experience. I didn't even get a rejection letter. So then they had sort of had what's called a failed search. They didn't fill the position. And so the next year, the chair of the search committee changed. And I guess my resume was in some pile. And so she called me. Her name is Mary Ellen. She's now a great friend of mine. She's a world traveler like I am, and she's an amazing mentor. But she called me, I'll never forget this. And she's like, hey, we'd like you to reapply. And I was like, no way. You people didn't even give me a rejection letter. I'm not doing that. And she said, why don't you just think about it? And she was so great. She called me a couple weeks later, and I had gone back to law practice for a year during this time. And I was frankly miserable. So I think she was just kind of waiting it out. And she called me and she said, how about you just come in and talk to us? So I went in, and for the first time in my life, I negotiated for what I felt I was worth. In my whole career, I had always just accepted whatever the salary was, et cetera. And this time I said to the search committee, I'm not really interested in this job unless you put me on tenure track and you frankly match my law firm salary. And they said, thank you for telling us that. And we'll consider that. And so then I just kind of kept going through the search process, and it got down to the final 4 and then the final 2. And I did a job talk in which, it's funny, I feel like I've just discovered this writer identity stuff, but I remember my job talk. I made a joke about how I was traveling, and I think I was either going into Mexico or coming home from Mexico, and I had to fill out a form and listed my occupation. And I did not write lawyer. I did not write law professor. I wrote writer, because I've always romanticized the life of a writer, and I identified as a writer over everything else. And anyway, I got the job. But the school really needed an overhaul in terms of like the number of credits that were devoted to legal writing education, the status of the faculty teaching in that program, the salaries of those people. So I had sort of a strategic plan, and we just did every 6 months, we just accomplished one of those goals. And so I feel like I left the program in a way that I'm really proud of, but I was really ready to step down. I accomplished what I felt I needed to accomplish, and it was time to turn it over to the people that were teaching in the program, and I wanted to do something completely new. So that's how that went.
I have to say, you made the comment that it wasn't until the teaching roles that you started negotiating for yourself. And one of our other book club authors, Dali Frum, who's a lawyer, a negotiator, and a coach here in Toronto, when we had her on during the Women's Day month in particular, one of the pieces of information that she gave to us, the stats, is that most women will not negotiate their first, second, third, fourth job terms, not just salary, but the terms, as you did as well. And the amount of money that's left on the table as a result is, when she gave me the number, and I remember it was in the millions over a course of the career, astronomical. So I'm so glad that you eventually got there and are talking about it today so that people understand the importance of negotiating and knowing your value. I think that's really, really critical. So thank you for that.
Can I chime in on that real quick? That's carried through also to my public speaking, because I would do so many things for free, etc., for quote exposure. And then I met this, what I call my little power squad, because there were other women who are out there speaking, and we started sharing tips on what to ask for certain presentations for different levels, like bar associations, law firms. And it was astonishing how much I was under marketing myself, or underselling myself in terms of what to ask for companies or institutions that do have money for speakers' fees. I mean, there's a lot that honestly don't, and I'm fine doing that. But it really helps, I think, to share with each other, confidentially, but share what we're able to command out there in the world, because we don't know sometimes.
Agree. And those are conversations that we can have with trusted friends. And I know, there's a few people who I've had those conversations with, and it's really, really useful, and not to be afraid of asking somebody about that. So I know that some of the people who are watching are potentially new to the profession. Have those conversations early. Don't undervalue yourself. And if you happen to be later on in the profession, know your worth and have those conversations at that time when the awareness is there. You talked about being strategic in some of your decisions. One of the questions that I ask all of our authors is the following. I'm a career coach. When I started the career development office at Osgood, planning and strategizing your career is very important. I still do believe that. However, another large part of what I think impacts our career is an openness to my favorite word, serendipity. So for those of you who've heard it before, my apologies, but I love the word. And I wonder if you can tell us, what's played more of an impact, or how have both of those, the strategic planning and then the serendipitous moments, if they have occurred, and it sounds like they have, what's impacted your career mostly?
I think it's really been, I think early on, I needed to be strategic, and again, I'm kind of like a workhorse sometimes when it comes to getting things that I want or feel like I've earned. So this 100 resume thing, I teach my students about that. It's a numbers game sometimes. It's not, I had no network, I had no connections. So for me, I had to just apply myself and approach it methodically. But I really love the whole thing about how I didn't get that teaching job, and then I could have just not answered the phone when that dean called me, or been like, oh no, that sounds too much, but I said yes. And I think what's really helped me in my career, which I also try to tell my students and my colleagues, is I apply for everything. Like if there's a grant opportunity that comes across some listserv, I apply for it. And also with these public speaking opportunities, I've just said yes a lot and made some really amazing friends. Now I'm starting to understand when I can and should say no. But I think being open-minded and taking a chance, like saying yes to that teaching job, it completely changed the direction of my career. I'm a much better, happier teacher than I really ever was as an attorney. I liked my job as an attorney, but I didn't know how to be happy then, and now I completely understand
I love it.
what makes me tick as a human being.
So let's dive into the book. And as we're diving into the book, I wouldn't mind if anybody wants to share. You don't have to, but on in the chat, if you've had those moments of serendipity in your careers or your career to date. So feel free to share that. You don't have to, but feel free to share that in the chat. The book now. I always start off with the author's why. And in this instance, you actually wrote 3 books. And I see 2 of them are showing in the back, Untangling Fear in Lawyering. I don't see, oh, there we go. Okay, there's the second one, Introverted Lawyer. There we go.
I should have this one displayed prominently because I love this little book.
So you've got the Introverted Lawyer, and then you did the Flourishing Lawyer. What is it about those 3 themes? And I know that there's some, interaction among all 3 of the books, but what was the why for you for those 3 books and the trilogy of these books in particular? Why did you want to research and write and then share this with the world, with the legal community and beyond?
I had always wanted to be a writer, like a book writer. And when I first started teaching, I noticed, first of all, I was still grappling with my own, honestly, extreme public speaking anxiety, but I stepped into the law classroom and I noticed that first year of teaching that my best legal writing students, my most creative problem solvers, thoughtful analysts, collaborative team players, when I made them work in little groups, were the quietest students in the class. And they were also the ones, as a legal writing professor, we get to know our students really well because we meet one-on-one with the students to work on their work, on their writing. And they would confide in me that they were also the students who were the most afraid to be cold called in the Socratic classroom or to try out for the kind of intense teams, etc. And so that first year, I was sad. I was like, we don't talk about this enough in law school. And I really wanted to save my students the 15 years of agony that I underwent, but I didn't know the science at all. So I started researching the science of introversion and extroversion, and also the difference between introversion and shyness and social anxiety, because I grappled, there are 3 different things, and I grappled with all of them. And so that's what launched me on this path to writing the first book. I actually wrote my very first law review article, which was absolutely awful. I wasn't on law review in law school, so I don't understand the genre very well. So I wrote this article called "The Silent but Gifted Law Student." But doing that article was, even though the product wasn't like the best piece of writing in the world, the science, the research behind it got me really excited to realizing I had more to say. And so I love the process of writing a book. When I have a book idea, I run to the office supply store and I buy these really colorful giant Post-its, like big ones.
Not these little ones?
No.
No.
I have them right here, but it's going to knock over a bunch of stuff.
No worries.
But I put them, I'm sure I drive my New York neighbors crazy, but I write in Sharpie on the post and I put it on my window. And then in the morning I sit there and I sip coffee and I stare at my Post-its, and then another idea comes and another one. And I know when I have 10 to 12 of my big idea Post-its, I have a book, because I can write the arc of the book. So I just started writing this book about introversion, and the first half was really delving into the strengths that introverts bring that are overlooked in the profession. But then the second half is, well, we don't have the luxury of just being quiet and thinking and writing, which we love to do. We have to be able to amplify our voices, and how to do that authentically. But the serendipity thing that I wanted, or maybe this isn't serendipity, but another challenge I faced, I had published a couple legal writing books, but they never excited me that much. So I had a publisher, but I couldn't sell this introversion book. Nobody wanted it. Nobody, but I was obsessed. I was like, this book needs to exist. And I just kept trying and kept trying and kept trying and kept trying. And then finally I got a contract from the ABA, American Bar Association. And now I've written 3 books with them, because I just wasn't willing to feel rejected. I mean, I was rejected, but I just refused to feel rejected. So I just kept sending that book out, and everybody was telling me, this won't sell. This will not sell. This will not sell. And I'm like, I can sell this book because people need to read it, and or people need to know that they're not alone. So that's what led me to the introversion book. And then ironically, I was running around again, going to law firms and law schools, talking about introversion. And people would come up to me afterwards. Of course, I was having a heart attack every time I had to get ready to go to these presentations. I was so nervous. But people would come up to me afterwards and say, hey, I'm not actually an introvert. I'm an extrovert. I'm totally gregarious and confident, but I'm scared to do this particular lawyering task. I'm scared to stand up to this kind of bully that I'm dealing with, either in the office or in a case I have, or I'm scared to go to court for the first time, or I'm afraid to object in depositions. What do I do? And because I dealt with all of that, I decided, okay, I wanted to write a book about fear and the science of fear and what happens in our bodies when we're afraid. And I'll talk a little bit about how I discovered this concept of somatic intelligence in my research. Other people invented that term, but I had never heard of it before. And discovering how fear manifested in my body and how it does for other people in different ways, that's what led to the second book. I like the word untangling. I've heard messages my whole life, just fake it till you make it, no. Face your fears, just, be afraid and do it anyway, or feel the fear and do it anyway. I tried all that stuff and none of that worked for me. I needed to untangle my fear and get to know it. And, two of my books have boxing gloves on the cover, and boxing helped me untangle my fear. Although in that cover, it's the tangled laces, which I really love. And then if you want me to pause, I will, but I can tell you how it got me to the third book.
No, please go ahead. And I do want to echo Sandra's comment about thanking you for writing The Introverted Lawyer, because I think so many students in law school and so many lawyers have this expectation from whether it's popular TV or whatever else, that you have to be an extrovert to do well in law. And that is so far from the truth. There's so many really amazingly talented and successful individuals that, whether introverted or extroverted, you've got to find your path, and being able to give voice to that and modeling that has been so remarkable for so many people. So yes, thank you. And let's go on to the Flourishing Lawyer, well-being. Tell us about why you chose that one.
Yep.
Why it chose you.
It did choose me. I guess this is another kind of career moment that I could have gone one direction and I went another. So I was really happy that the fear book had come out, but I really love writing books. I love the process. I love the discipline of it. And I guess the fear book came out in 2019, but I had finished it in 18. So I had a hankering to write another book, and I wanted to write something about lawyers giving ourselves regard as athletes or performers. And I kind of pitched that idea to my publisher, but they didn't really understand it very well, or I wasn't communicating it very well. And so I put together this other proposal, and this was February of 2020. And I was also up for tenure the same month. And I had also applied for a master's in positive psychology program at University of Pennsylvania. All this was happening at the same time. And I was turning 50 on March 26th of 2020. So while all this is happening, the pandemic hits. And I was supposed to get on a plane and go to Rome for my 50th birthday alone, because I love traveling alone. And that got canceled, obviously. I had to shift my entire legal writing program with 11 professors online, and I had never gotten on Zoom in my life. So I did all that. I did get tenure, by the way, but it was not an easy process for me. And then what happened was I got accepted to the master's program, and my whole plan was get tenure, take sabbatical, do the master's program. You can do it all, woman. No. COVID had plans. So I couldn't take time off, because I really did need to sort of spearhead the transition of my program online for that whole academic year. I said yes to the master's program, which luckily, because everybody was stuck at home, I could do that, even though I was getting up at 4 a.m. every day. So that whole year, I did my master's program where I learned all this science around positive psychology and this character and character strengths and multidimensional fitness and somatic intelligence. So really, while I was getting my master's, it was all the research I needed to write a book uh, that put all these concepts together. And Dr. Martin Seligman, who's sort of the father of positive psychology, had written a book called Flourish. Mm. And I had read Flourish way before I got into the program. And suddenly it clicked for me that, oh, I'm going to combine lawyering with Dr. Seligman's concept of flourishing, which is functioning well. It's not just feeling good, like positive, happy. It's functioning well. And so I approached the master's program as, okay, this is the research for my next book. And then I told my publisher, I'm changing the whole concept, trash the proposal, we're starting it over, but I can't start writing it until the end of this year because I just have no time. So long story short, got through that academic year, I was losing my mind. And I then asked my dean for a sabbatical when that academic year ended. He graciously said yes, thankfully. And I bought, it was right at the end of May 9th, 2021. I bought a one-way ticket to Croatia because it was only one of 2 countries I could get into at the time. Nothing was open. I packed 2 suitcases full of my research books and I went to Croatia, stayed for 11 days, and then Spain opened and I like hopscotched across from Croatia to Vienna, Austria, to Barcelona, to Tenerife in the Canary Islands. And I sat there and I wrote my book. And it was, again, the process that I just love. It was I have a really disciplined writing process. I get up every morning. I'm a big fan of the author, Julia Cameron, the book, The Artist's Way. So I do morning pages journaling first. And then I hunker down and I write for 2 hours. And I can get a lot done in 2 hours, but the second the 2-hour time is up, I get up and I go leave and work out. But I was in this beautiful tropical location all by myself, and this book just shaped itself. I actually had to ditch my usual way of writing where I'm very clear on what I'm going to write every day. And this time I had to let the book tell me what it wanted to be, which sounds really touchy-feely, but it completely did. It spoke to me every day. And I came home from that trip. I was away for 7 weeks, and I came home with a really bad 300-page manuscript, but I got that done, and then I had to edit it over that following year. So that's my long-winded way of explaining that book.
Well, it's interesting how you were ignited by so many different reasons for writing this book. And, having a profession that is flourishing, having individuals within a profession that are flourishing is a wonderful ideal and goal. And you give some very concrete ways that we can achieve that with some thought and with some practice. Before we go to the next question, I have to ask you though, how do you stop at 2 hours? Like and you've said in your book that you have a discipline and a regimen where you write for 2 hours. If you're in flow, do you not go for another half hour, an hour, or do you set the time where you say, stop, get up?
I really can't go beyond 2 hours. I'm really prone to migraines, and when I love you mentioned flow. I love the concept of flow. It's actually a positive psychology concept that you're so immersed. It's Dr. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi who wrote a book called Flow. And his description is you're so immersed in what you're doing, and the challenge before you, your skill level meets the challenge. The challenge is not too high. You're not bored. You're like in sync, and you lose all sense of time and space. And when I am in that zone, which happens, I can get myself in that zone if the environmental circumstances around me are right. Like I need to be alone. It's got to be quiet. I have to be comfortable. I can hit it. But 2 hours and I emerge, like my hair is all over the place. I'm hot and sweaty and I feel like I've just run a marathon. So it's actually not good for me to do more than 2 hours. I get headachy, and the stuff that I would produce in that extra half an hour would not be worth putting my body through that, honestly.
That's actually good to know. And I have to thank you. You're going to laugh, but you had I don't know what the proper term is. You spelled out how to say that name. Cheek sent me high. I don't know if and I had it on a sticky, because each time the first 3 times I'd see it, I'd think, oh, what did she write? What did she write? And it wasn't coming naturally to me. So I would write it on a sticky so I could go back to the sticky whenever I saw it and actually say, cheek sent me high, cheek sent me high. So thank you for that. That was really, really useful to do. Let's get into the book. There's a few things in particular. You wanted to take a brand new approach to character and fitness to the practice of law through a well-being lens. And I wonder if you can talk to us a little bit about, in particular, the approach to character first, and then we'll get to fitness. Let's talk about that, because well-being is something that we've started talking about in the profession, but wasn't something previously really that we had talked about.
Definitely. So as a professor, every year my students come to me and they say, can you fill out one of those character and fitness evaluations for me, because I'm applying to be admitted to this particular jurisdiction? And of course, I always say yes. But every time I feel like I'm just checking boxes on a form. Yes, check. As of today, this person has character. But what does that mean?
Mhm.
And I think it was one of my deans gave a convocation speech to the incoming class about character and fitness. And then when I was in this master's program, we learned about this amazing tool that I'm kind of obsessed with, which I write about in the book, but it's the VIA, the Values in Action Institute on Character, has this scientifically validated assessment, and it's free and it's confidential, but it's like a 15 to 20-minute assessment where 55 scientists got together and they chose 24 character strengths and situated them within 6 virtues. And if you think about lawyering, ideally we're supposed to be a profession about virtue, like justice and wisdom and humanity. And so as I did the VIA, and I was so excited when I saw, so it basically gives you a report of your 20, everybody has these 24 strengths, but we all have them ranked in a different way. And I was so excited when I saw what they called your top 5 signature strengths. And I kind of laughed because my number 1 is perseverance. So my 100 resume thing,
Yep.
but a colleague in my master's program who's about my age as well, she's like, I'm tired of persevering. I'm exhausted. Let's stop persevering. But so my top 5 are perseverance, zest, which I love, which is like my boxing and travel and the U2 concerts, etc. And then curiosity, creativity, and love of learning. And so what I learned about character or these character strengths, is that your top ones have the 3 E's. They energize, excite, and come easily for you, which I love, because that's true about those 5 for me. There's the cool thing about this is there's 5.1 million different configurations of the top 5, which means that we all here today on this call bring a different set of equally important character strengths to the profession. Now, one more quick note on the character on mine. As I mentioned to you, the past 7 years, I've been leading a team for 90% of my job, a team of 10 professors. Guess what my bottom 2 strengths are? Leadership and teamwork. When I saw that, I was like, oh, am I terrible at this job? However, when I, again, acknowledged the research of the experts, I realized the 3 E's. Leading this team does not energize, excite, or come easily for me. It actually exhausts me. But with that knowledge, I was able to approach the job differently. And on the days that I needed to be a leader or have team meetings, or during the pandemic, it was all on Zoom, which I knew would just drain me, I would plan my days differently. So the days that I was creating and curious and love of learning and being a teacher and a writer, I had tons of energy on those days. But the leadership and teamwork days, I knew were going to be more grueling for me. So as knowing myself better, I could use that information to enhance my performance in those aspects. So that's why I think a different look at character, and you don't have to use the VIA. There's a million other strengths finders and strengths profile. I think there's strengths profile, strengths finder. I like the VIA because it's actually strengths related to character, but there's other ways for us to delve into our character. But I think we should be talking about this from day 1 in law school, that character is something we can cultivate and nourish and change over the course of our lives and foster and do and flourish, basically.
And I love the fact that it's also tied to the three E's. And you said it, I think you may have referenced it in the book, but I didn't sort of put it together as three E's: the energy, the energizing, the exciting, and coming easy. It doesn't mean that we can't lead or that we can't be zestful if that's not one of our top strengths, but that we'll have to approach that differently. And as you gave the perfect example, that on days when you did need to be with your team or did need to lead a workshop or something else, you'd have to structure it a little bit differently and just be aware of it. So that awareness, I think, is absolutely critical. The first step is to be aware. We're going to come to the dimensions, but talk about fitness and why the fitness part of character and fitness intrigued you as well.
I really love, so I mentioned the boxing, and obviously since boxing gloves are on two of my books, I love boxing, and my family and friends think I'm kind of a little bananas how much I love boxing, but it has totally changed my life because it's taught me that even though I was never an athlete in high school or college or as a young adult, I can treat myself like one now. And what I've learned through putting myself into something that's physically difficult, it's taught me a lot about how to about the relationship between my physical body, my mental health, and my emotions, because they're all very interconnected.
Mhm.
And so in thinking about how to motivate lawyers and law students and any member of our profession, judges, paralegals, everyone, to give ourselves regard as like scholar athletes or scholar performers. If the athlete model, that doesn't resonate for everybody, but performers are the same way, like singers, dancers, actors. We can treat ourselves like that, and those performers don't just focus on the one skill that brings them glory on the stage or in the arena. They care about their multidimensional development. And if they don't have the expertise to focus on one of their dimensions, they seek help from coaches and trainers and nutritionists.
Mhm.
And also when they have a problem or they're faltering, like Simone Biles at the Olympics, or Naomi Osaka, the tennis player, they say out loud, "Hey, I'm stumbling right now," or my golfers maybe can't putt anymore. I don't know, whatever the analogy you want to use. And we don't look at them like their career is over. They just get help with that particular dimension. And so
Mhm.
I think that's a way that we can look at lawyering and the fitness to practice law, not just intellectual fitness. We've all got, we've all done the things we need to do to satisfy that. But what about all the other dimensions? And so I felt like it was important to look at multidimensional fitness to practice law instead of just always talking about intellect.
No, I'm so grateful to you for sort of framing it in this way. We're going to talk about the framework in a second, but the ability to see ourselves as whole, the ability to see ourselves from various areas. We're not individually, individual paths. We're not just up here. We are so many other things, and I think it's incredible that we've got that conversation. But for you to do that, you came up with this framework, and it was partially um, preordained from a report that had happened. Then you came up with another thing, which what I mean is the 10 dimensions. Can you talk to us about them? And I have to say thank you, because I was getting a little bit overwhelmed thinking, oh my gosh, how do I deal with all of these 10 dimensions? And you also beautifully sort of said in your book, you said to me and to the readers, stop, you don't have to do them all at the same time. So let's talk about the framework that you developed while you were in, maybe it was while you were in Croatia or wherever else you were, that came up with this.
Thank you. And yes, I love that you mentioned that we're not just a brain. One of the books that I lugged around the world with me was by a woman named Caroline Williams, who wrote a book called Move. I
Mhm.
think it's like the new there's a subtitle, but she said we are not just a brain on legs.
Yeah.
We have a whole body between our brain and our legs. So I got inspired to do the multidimensional fitness thing. There's a national task force on lawyer well-being that I'm sure people have heard about, and in 2017 they issued a report identifying 6 dimensions of well-being. So I figured I should adhere to that and start with those. And that was intellectual, occupational, physical, social, emotional, and spiritual. And for them, for spiritual means finding meaning and purpose. It doesn't necessarily have to mean religious connotations, but it can mean whatever anybody wants it to mean in terms of meaning and purpose. And and I like those dimensions, especially the physical one, which we'll get to. But I felt like a couple for me personally were missing, or there were nuances to those that I wanted to dive into further, and that I got inspired to do by all that stuff I was studying and reading. The first one was artistic and creative dimension, because I feel like I think I was inspired by Julia Cameron from The Artist's Way to not only treat myself like the athlete or performer, which I figured out from other people, but Julia Cameron inspires me to think of myself as an artist. And by the way, I'm a terrible artist, but as a writer,
Yeah.
I treat myself like an artist. And so I added artistic and creative. I added moral and ethical because
Mm.
the toughest times I had in my 15 years of full-time practice of law, and then another 5 of sort of part-time on top of that, the toughest days were making ethical decisions where everyone acted like the right answer should be so obvious, but it wasn't. And we get no training in how to, in my opinion, I did not get training in how to handle the gray areas as well as I would have liked, and that caused me less stress. So ethical and moral, and then cultural, the cultural dimension. For me, travel is a mode of well-being, and it's one of my 4 pillars of well-being, to be honest with you. And the pandemic was hard because of that, for many reasons, obviously, but for everyone. But for me, the travel aspect was challenging because culture and being around people from other cultures and learning and exercising cultural humility. I like that term instead of cultural competence, cultural humility. That's an aspect of a dimension of our wholeness that we need to dive into. And then the last one I added was the caring and caregiving dimension, because I think that's different from the social and emotional dimensions. I think it's an aspect that, again, gets kind of overlooked. I practiced hard-hitting construction litigation my whole career, but there was still a dimension of empathy and compassion, and sympathy, empathy, and compassion I deal with there, and then also trauma and vicarious trauma. So those are the 10.
Those are, again, really important dimensions to have. And again, with the focus and the lens always of well-being in the profession, to be able to elevate that. Just, I'm not sure if you're aware, but our former Chief Justice, George Strathy, wrote an article last year where he was writing to litigators in particular, but speaking, and he's an individual who's had a long time litigation practice and then working as a judge, but almost kind of saying to everybody, stop, let's take a look at what's impacting us, and let's take a look at well-being. The gladiator mentality, for example, you got to stop that. It's not working for people. And he was very vulnerable in some of the things that he wrote about. And so I think being able to use these 10 dimensions and think about them for each of us is really, really critical. And thank you for the permission to do it one dimension at a time, because that, change of 10 things in our lives, or attention on 10 things at once, can be overwhelming. We're going to focus on 3 things, and then we're going to open it up to people for questions and comments. You started off with the physical dimension. You talk about the athlete a lot, but tell us why you started off with the physical dimension and what it means for you.
Okay. Yes. And I'm so glad you brought up the gladiator analogy, because when I talk about boxing all the time, everyone's like, oh, that's such a dangerous, aggressive sport. But what Lou, my trainer, teaches me is that it's actually a dance. It's not. And he said the best fighters in real life or on the street or whatever know how to not engage. And so it's really an art of learning how to manage your breathing and your emotions and your reactions such that you do not have to hurt somebody.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great analogy for lawyering too. I mean, if we do not approach it like a gladiator battle, but instead more of an artful dance of how to find truth and solve problems, I think it could really change the way we do it. So for me, because my 2 decades of stress and anxiety were manifested so physically, you can sort of see it on Zoom, but I have a very robust blushing response. So when I'm the center of attention, or I don't know the answer to something, or I feel embarrassed, or I also have a really deep shame trigger, my face turns really red, and my neck gets blotchy, and I get really hot and sweaty. And as a young lawyer, it really detrimentally affected my intellectual performance. And so in the book, I really wanted to dive into the physical first, because to me, I think for a lot of people like me who do have a lot of physical manifestations of lack of well-being, getting that sorted out can really help first, at least on a foundational level, can have ripple effects through all the others. So I had to study myself, but I first, in order to write about it, but I studied somatic intelligence and how to understand how our emotions affect our bodies and our nervous systems and all that, and how our bodies can help manage our emotions and drive our cognition. So some of the research I came across in that master's program, John Ratey, Ratey, wrote a book called Spark, and he was talking, he and a co-author talks about how movement, just even walking, you do not have to put yourself in boxing lessons, walking down the street or moving in any way. There's even the ways you can visualize movement if you have movement limitations, that helps your brain synapses. I'm getting the words wrong right now, but it's in the book. But by understanding our somatic intelligence, and we can recalibrate. I see somebody just put in the chat, you feel it in your back, pain.
That was me. Yeah, I just say that I see
yeah.
it in my back and I hunch more, and that's how I feel it. And that connection, but it's taken me a long time to be aware that that's how it manifests, and that's what what shows up for me. Yeah.
And so the cool part of the physical dimension is, first of all, paying attention to that. So a lot of times we just barrel into these activities and we're not aware. So part of the somatic intelligence is paying attention. For me, when I get nervous, my face turns red, which I can't control, but also I hunch my shoulders forward. I cross my arms, cross my legs. In the fight, flight, or freeze, I have the freeze, and then I want to flee. So what I realize is that doesn't help my oxygen and blood and energy flow. So I have to completely recalibrate. And I've had to teach myself how to pause, throw my shoulders back, uncross my arms and legs, and stand or sit, if you're in a meeting or something, in a balanced stance, like an athlete or like a performer. And then you layer the emotional and cognitive on top of that. But the physical dimension changed, like working on that first really changed my whole life, because now I can recognize, oh, I'm holding my breath again. In boxing, I either hold my breath or I overbreathe. It's not, I don't have an efficient breathing. I do the same thing in public speaking. So I've had to train myself to notice and then recalibrate.
So I'm not sure if we lost you temporarily, but maybe that's I think I'm getting unstable internet. Oh no, I've got you back. Okay. We're good. We're good to go. All right. So helping you to recalibrate. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So just a couple more things on the physical. The themes I like for the physical are, again, giving yourself permission to get to know yourself. That's the somatic intelligence. There's a concept in sports called prehabilitation.
Loved it.
We all know about rehabilitation, which is looking backwards or after something has already happened, right? That's rehabilitation. We try to rehabilitate after something's happened. But prehabilitation is, again, treating ourselves like athletes or performers and thinking ahead to the high stakes performance arena, and what can we do now? And the athlete model, or even the medical profession, talks about prehabilitation. If you know you have a stressful event coming up, like a surgery, for instance, there's procedures we can do to bolster like vulnerable areas around vulnerable joints, or what I'm getting, again, the phrasing wrong. My introverted brain's getting muddled. But prehabilitation is actively anticipating we're gonna have stress. We're going to it. We can't avoid it, and trying to avoid it is not possible. But we can set up systems. So for me, I used to always over prepare for speaking events or performances or work, and I would be around people too much before I would be about to go do something. So I had to learn. I had to stop. I had to set up a new system. That makes me more vulnerable to more anxiety. So now I have a cutoff, like my cutting myself off after 2 hours of writing. If I have a big speech coming up, I am not allowed to look at my notes anymore, like 24 hours before that thing. I mean, I may glance at them that morning, but I'm not allowed to run it through again. I will not rehearse it in front of a person because that makes me more nervous. For all of you, that might work great, but for me, I have systems that I set up now, so I'm in my strongest mode, not my mode of how I was trying to fake it till I make it all those years. That doesn't work for me. There's two other concepts that I'll just throw out there, and we can move on to another dimension. But there's another sports concept called eyes off. I think it's the Russian sports psychologist named Dr. Yuri Hanin, Hanin. He did all these studies on athletes, and he figured out that there's an individual zone of optimal functioning, which he called eyes off, IZOF, individual zone of optimal functioning, where for every individual athlete, there's a zone where both positive and negative emotions can put you in the best performance state, but it's different for everyone. So for some of us, I function better on positive reinforcement. And like my boxing trainer knows, if he nitpicks and yells at me for 60 minutes, he's getting nothing out of me. But if he says one nice thing for every 3 criticisms, I'm good. But so for me, I need positive emotions, and I'm not fueled. I lose performance edge when I'm angry, and when I'm I don't know, like negative emotions for me are like anger and jealousy, things like that. But there are certain things like I'm so anyway, for each of us, there's an individualized zone where positive and negative emotions in the right combination help us perform at our peak. And that comes from the athlete mind. So I just think it's something for us to consider. And then the other zone is the flow zone, which we talked about earlier. Cheek sent me high. You know, athletes and performers can hit that flow zone. And for us, understanding how our bodies can fuel our minds. Like I know if I set up my physical surroundings, but also my body's in the right frame of being, I can write better, which sounds weird, but if I'm comfortable, if I'm not too hot, I'm not too cold, I'm not too tired, I actually got a decent amount of sleep, I can write amazingly well or not that it's a good work product, but I can generate work product well for 2 hours.
It's one of the things that here in Ontario, we used to have 2 7-hour bar exams. One was the barrister, one was the solicitor exam. And one of the comments by many people was that it's 7 hours. You know, yes, you get a half hour, or sorry, you get an hour break in between, but you're writing for 3 hours, then a break, and then 3 hours. And the environment wasn't necessarily conducive to everybody to be able to perform their best. So yes, it's a multiple choice exam, but thinking and performance, that physical part was not something that was necessarily taken into account. I loved how you used a lot of Greek words. We won't go into some of the eudaimonic. Oh my gosh, I didn't even say it correctly.
You
but
did.
let me. But let's go to the emotional part, because one of the things that I really hope that the profession will start understanding is the emotional dimension that we bring in, and you talk about it within the second dimension. It's the next chapter after physical. What do you think it's all about in terms of emotion? Why is that important for you to have as a dimension of well-being?
I put the emotion right after the physical because I think they're so intertwined. And like I mentioned, the eyes off. The eyes off is our physical performance, but it's tied to positive and negative emotions. And so I wanted it to come next because, I think a lot of times my students think there's no emotion in lawyering. I think lawyering is like 95% emotion.
Agreed.
Where there's so much, we're affected by what's happening around us. And if we don't address our emotions, it's as I just mentioned, it'll have negative performance effects. So on what I learned in doing the research on the emotional realm, there were a couple concepts that really jumped out at me in the books I was reading, and one was positivity resonance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's Dr. Barbara Fredrickson that wrote about positivity resonance. And what that means is when you're with a person or a couple people and it's a positive emotional connection, she calls it the upward spiral effect. Like you actually can, even you're in a good mood or you're saying positive reinforcement or encouraging things, or just even listening in an attentive way to another person, you're lifting each other's emotional energy together, and it has an upward spiral effect. And I learned, actually, it wasn't from her book, but another book, about 4 different communication patterns. And one is called active constructive responding. And so when someone shares something with you, not only do you respond actively, or not only do you respond constructively by saying, oh wow, that sounds interesting, you get active and you say, tell me more, or you ask a follow-up question. I love active constructive responding. And I realized, as an introvert, I have like a close circle of friends. I don't like, sometimes people will be like, hey, you want to go out tonight? And I literally will have no plans. I'll be like, nope, I'll be fine being by myself. But I have a small group of friends that I love going out with them because they're active, constructive responders. There's a lot of back and forth and follow-up questions. The other 3 are passive constructive, where you're still like positive, but you basically nod and then go back staring at your iPhone. Not That's not going to cause positivity resonance. And then there's active destructive, which I have to say, some of my most involved caregivers have been passive destructive, or active destructive, sorry, where they always point out the negative side, or like what's going to go wrong, or you really shouldn't quit your job, like you should stay in this job that you're no longer happy in forever because you're lucky someone's paying you to do things.
We've all heard that. Yeah.
Active destructive, not good. And then passive destructive is also dangerous because that's just completely ignoring you. And I have like invisibility issues with feeling invisible, etc. So I really liked that side of emotion. I hadn't heard our emotional well-being explained in terms of how we communicate and how we can take an active role in not only our own emotional well-being, but those of the people around us. And this doesn't mean just always being like a yes person or Pollyanna about everything, but it's being conscious of how we interact with people. And also, if people are kind of bringing us down because they're actively destructive, we can either, in certain circumstances, choose to limit our interaction with them, or we can learn how to articulate to them, hey, it really isn't conducive to my well-being or my best work product when you respond this way, and can we work on that? So there's ways. I make some suggestions in the book on how to do that.
I love that you have a chart that actually has the 4 type of different responses and some suggestions, because what you just said right now, many of us with our bosses, sometimes family members, have people who are, and you did allude to this, sometimes they've fallen into the role of being the one to give the constructive criticism, and sometimes it's not what you need, though. And being able to articulate that, just as we talked at the beginning of how important it is for us to know our value and negotiate our worth for at a job, in our relationships with emotions, it's really important to be able to understand. And I'm so grateful that you mentioned, I was going to remind everybody, positive psychology doesn't mean that everything is all happy all the time. It's how you deal with the world as it is, both the positive and the negative, in a way that's more resilient. So the chart that you have in the book, if anybody has the book with them, it's a really phenomenal way to be able to work through that. Let me get to the next one, because your next chosen dimension was I was so glad, because we oftentimes have conversations where lawyers think they're just one-sided, one side of their brain, the logical, rational side. What about the rest of us? What about the rest of our bodies and minds and souls, the creative side? And I love that you use that as your next dimension. You talk about the creative and artistic. Sorry, those 2 words, the creative and artistic. And I'm going to throw something at you, just because I was doing something in the kitchen. Baking and cooking can also be quite artistic. So I wanted to throw that out for any bakers or cooks out there, that's a creative and artistic venture as well. But talk to us about that dimension.
Totally. I love cooking and baking, and I don't love doing those things, but I love it. Those are artistic. I'm such a New Yorker. I literally opened my refrigerator this morning, and can't believe I'm about to say this on this.
That's okay.
I took a picture of it because there's literally on one shelf a bottle of champagne, a bottle of eye cream, and a tub of cake icing.
Icing. Okay, that's good. There's got to be cake somewhere. No, but
this is how I live.
I love it.
Clearly, I am not a role model for well-being in the refrigerator. You mentioned one thing too about positive psychology, and because you mentioned eudaimonia, So eudaimonia is the Greek word, the EU is Greek for good. And that, like you said, it doesn't mean just feeling good, it means functioning well. So knowing that we're not going to feel great all the time, I'm going to need that cake icing and champagne sometimes, but it's functioning well. So that's why I wanted to include the artistic and creative dimension as number 3. And it felt kind of empowering to do this because, you know, the first dimension was kind of treating ourselves like athletes or performers. The second was the emotion, as we talked about. And the third is treating ourselves like artists, however you define that term. And doing the research for this book, that's another thing about positive psychology. And there's a big distinction between just what they call self-help, and I'm a proud self-help author. Like, my introverted book was total self-help. Same with the fear, but positive psychology endeavors to put the science behind all of that, which I've tried to do as well. So in the combining the art, the artistic and creative dimension, the experts that I cite in the book who actually study the links between doing art, not as a professional, but as amateurs, there are scientific links between engaging and playing with art and just getting messy with art and what positive well-being affects. And so that's why I wanted to include this, because I think you're right. Lawyers, my law students, feel like they can't be creative. And I teach legal writing. So they think legal writing is not a creative art. And I'm like, it absolutely is. It's logic. Like, we have to follow a logic flow. And I'm teaching my new students now about what's called the discourse conventions of this discourse community of law. We have to follow certain conventions, but there's a lot of room for creativity in there because you're storytelling about what's happening between our clients. So the experts say, that I quote in the book, say that making art in whatever form you like is good for our bodies and our minds. And so I mentioned The Artist's Way, Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way. And so I'm a huge fan of hers. And so there are 3 creative gurus that I admire a lot. Julia Cameron is one, because she taught me about the morning pages, which is 3 handwritten pages of journaling every single morning. And I kind of make a joke that if you resist this idea, buy yourself the smallest journal you've ever seen, because 3 pages will take you like a minute. Because she said, don't do 4 pages, don't do 2. It's the science of the 3 that gets the stress out of you. And I've gotten all my creative ideas from those journals. A lot of times in the morning, I'll write, I have nothing to say, I have nothing to say, I have nothing to say. And then boom, I'm like, oh, wait, I'm kind of excited about this little thread of an idea. And it goes on the Post-it on the window. So that's one book. Twyla Tharp, the famous choreographer, wrote another amazing book about the creative habit. And she talks about the importance of creative ritual. And so you set up systems, kind of like athletes and performers do, to give yourself permission to create. And so your body, if you get out your art supplies, or you're gonna do something creative in the kitchen or gardening, or the second thing that Julia Cameron advocates is taking yourself on artist dates. And I love that. And so when I travel, I used to actually buy those little disposable cameras, but now I just use my iPhone. But I will go on an artist date with myself looking for graffiti or cool street art, because that's the kind of art that I love. I love the juxtaposition of kind of modern, rebellious color where it's, quote, not supposed to be, next to like some Roman statue that's been there for 2,000 years. I just think that juxtaposition is so cool. But that's like an artist date that makes me happy, and it enhances my well-being, so then I can perform better when I sit down to do my writing or my legal work or whatever I'm doing. And then the third source that I love is a guy named Stephen Pressfield, has written these cool little books. I say little, they're powerful, but they're thin, short, they're quick to read. One is called The War of Art, and it's about how to get over the resistance that we feel toward art, because it opens up a complete world to us of all the things that I've been talking about, like the connection between our bodies and our creative minds and our emotions and our cognitive power as lawyers. So his books are really cool. So I would start with The War of Art, and then I'm making my students read his next one called Turning Pro, because it's all about how to get ourselves out of the amateur mindset and treating ourselves like we're professionals. The other experts that I talk about in that chapter on art say that you do not have to be a fancy, quote, real artist to get well-being effects from playing around with crayons or, pens, paper, pencil, colored pencils, clay, ceramics, whatever you like. That it's really positive.
I'm looking at I'm gonna go get it in a second, but a firm, one of their little, what's called loot bags or takeaways, I think I got it last year at some conference, is a cool little crayon bag, if you will, that is in the form of an affidavit or a legal document. And then inside they added a small pack of crayons and 3 little, funny pictures that are law related. And that's what they were handing out. And I thought, brilliant. You know what? How brilliant that you're allowed. It's not a keychain. It's not all those things are wonderful, but the creativity that went into that, and people who have seen this have just thought, oh, that's really a neat idea. Lawyers are creative. Individuals as individuals, we are creative, and being able to express that on the job and even outside of the job to help fuel that creativity is so really important. I want to just pause and see if anybody has, and thank you, Sandra, for indicating year of painting. None of us painters, to be clear, just brought blank canvas for everyone, paints, and it was so much fun. I love that idea about a family gift for Christmas. What a wonderful idea. Let me just open it up. I have another question or so that I have for Heidi, but if anybody wants to unmute, take your show your cameras, please feel free to do so. I just want to give you the opportunity to speak to Heidi as well directly, but I appreciate if people don't, we can go on with some more questions. Let me just pause though. Sophia, welcome. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me. Hi, Heidi. It's been a pleasure listening to everything you've had to say. I'm actually a psychology student, so not a professional lawyer. So it's really interesting. I wrote down a couple things you said that I'm going to look into after the fact. But in terms of a creative outlet for me, I love to cook, and I find that it turns something that I often dread into something exciting. So I purposely will not buy like pasta sauces or things at the store because it just motivates me to create my own. And then at the end I get to enjoy it. So that's my creative outlet.
I love that. That's so inspiring.
On a student budget, of course.
Of course. That's good. You can create more out of less. I love that.
Love that.
And I wanted to point out, I like Sandra's words in the chat of coping forward. I guess that was in response to prehabilitation. So I like that phrasing. I'd never heard it that way before. I like that.
There's Sandra's creative element right there. Sandra, hey there. She's totally
hello,
creative.
and that's my painting in the back.
Cool. I love it. So we've got painters and chefs. Very creative.
Yeah. And I love Heidi, I love the notion that you may not be at a top level in all these dimensions at once, but that being aware of which ones are lacking and how to energize or feed those areas is so important. And the creative side, I often find I divert myself to that, and then I have 10 other ideas about the other stuff, just by taking that little pause and switching gears with my mind. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. I'm glad you both, Gina and Sandra, have brought up the fact that it can feel overwhelming to feel like, oh my gosh, we have to fix 10 dimensions of ourselves. But I really want to say, and I write about this in the book, that this isn't meant to be overwhelming, and it can be, we can spread it out over a lifetime, really, just being aware, as you just said, Sandra, of how could I, which one's my priority this week or this month or this quarter or even this year? Like I could dedicate this whole year to just one dimension. But also having the mindset, this is why I like Julia Cameron's 3-page quota thing, because you can redefine how expansive or how limited you want to focus on a particular dimension, and then set a parameter like that. I mean, for me, knowing that my morning pages are just 3 pages, now I buy, actually, it's funny, I order my journals. I like spiral bound, these fat jumbo journals, and I order them from Canada. I think they're from a brand called Eco Dot, because I like that they're spiral and they have these really rebellious Frida Kahlo quotes on the cover. And I order them from Canada, and that 3 pages is the right size for me to not feel overwhelmed. So I think you can kind of use that as an analogy for any of these well-being dimensions, that the artistic dimension does not have to feel overwhelming. You can do it once a week with go to the grocery store as Sophia does, and I think it was Sophia, right? And make that your artistic. And then the next week, choose a different dimension and spend 10 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever makes you feel most comfortable and not overwhelmed.
I appreciate that. Any other comments before I have one question that I do want to ask Heidi, but I want any other comments or input before we move forward. Okay. Feel free to put it in the chat if you do have any. But Heidi, you wrote, I think it was in the very beginning of the book, and then throughout, a hope that you had as you were writing this in the, at the height of the pandemic that we had. You had said, let's hope that this is a new slate, a new book, a new chapter for the legal profession to be able to look at things differently. Your book was published, I guess, 2022 or 2021? 2022.
May of 22.
May of 2022. So, it's now 3 years later from when you wrote the first draft, at least, a year after publishing. What do you think about where we are as a profession in North America in particular? Have we moved forward? Do we still have a lot of room to go? And I think the answer to that is yes, but I just wonder if you can sort of, your hope of a new slate, where does that sit with at this stage?
I think so positive things that I think have come out of this whole pandemic experience. I do think as a profession, we're more aware, we're more able to talk about the environmental work conditions in which we as individuals do our best work. I think what the pandemic revealed is that people function in different ways. I mean, some people really love being in the office, and some people, really, like me, for instance, I love working at home and I'm very productive at home. And so now I am going into the office, but I know that the days I go into the office, which is more often now because it's a new job for me, I'm really not going to get a lot of productive work done. I'll be around people, which is great. And I'm obviously teaching in person. But I need to articulate to the people I'm working with and working for that if I have to get a piece of writing done, or I'm designing a curriculum or something, I'm probably going to do that at home. And so you may not see me for 2 days if that's what I'm working on, but it doesn't mean I'm not committed and I'm not working hard. So I think to answer your question, our profession has gained better awareness around differences in individual working styles. But I think now the push to have everybody back in the office for community reasons is we still need to be mindful of how individuals do their best work. Like, I worked in law firms where my bosses absolutely wanted all the associates' doors wide open, and they wanted to be able to stroll right in there, and I can't get work done that way. But I never knew how to articulate to my boss why I needed my door closed. I think I wrote in one of the books I wrote about how I undid the light. I can't remember which book it's in, but there was a fluorescent light that was buzzing in my office and it was driving me crazy and I couldn't function. And I had the maintenance guys help me undo it. And I brought in a desk lamp, but my office looked dark. And I love writing in the dark, or not in the dark, but I can't have oppressive lighting. It drove my boss crazy and he was so mad. And he made me put the light back in. But I couldn't write my briefs that way. So my point is, I think the pandemic and the last couple of years has enhanced our awareness of differences in each other, and maybe enhanced our respect for our differences and diversity in how we work. I think we do have kind of a ways to go still, though, in priorities. I had dinner with one of my former students a couple weeks ago, and I feel like all she talked about was money, and I didn't hear any excitement about the actual work, and that made me a little bummed out. But I'm proud of her for being able to pay off her student loans. So, so that's something. And then the last thing I wanted to bring up in terms of where we need to go, I mean, we've got this huge new challenge, which is generative AI, and the change that's going to bring to, as a writer, teaching legal writing. I'm really trying to educate myself, because I joke with my students, I'm such a Luddite. I had a landline in my apartment until like a month ago. So I'm having to put myself in seminars on Chat GPT and all these different tools, which I think eventually will help us. But right now it just feels a little scary, and learning how to use those tools ethically and responsibly, but still not shortchange ourselves in the learning of the fundamental skills that we need to be really amazing lawyers and human lawyers, being able to still have that empathy and healthy empathy and all those sorts of things. So I think that's where we have our work cut out for us, but I'm optimistic.
We will keep talking about it for sure. Now, one of the things in your book that I noticed late this afternoon, I hadn't noticed it at the very end, you actually have a curriculum plan for within your book. And so I had taken some notes down. I'm doing a 1-week intensive on emotional and cultural intelligence next week to three L's to third years at one of our law schools. And there are a couple of things that I wanted to integrate. But when I saw this curriculum, what was the purpose of you adding a curriculum? Is it so that anybody can sort of guide others through? Tell us a little bit about the curriculum. And thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. I honestly, when I write these books, I genuinely want it to help people avoid a lot of the angst that I went through. Because I really think a lot of the stuff that I went through was unnecessary and can be avoided. And so but I also want it to be practical, because I think a lot of the pushback that we get in our profession about well-being is that it's too touchy-feely, or it's soft, and we don't want to reduce the rigor of the intellectual rigor of the profession. And where I'm coming from is absolutely, this is a hard profession. It's hard for a reason. We're dealing with high-stakes situations, whether it's financial or personal. I mean, it's always high stakes no matter what. And so we need to be good at our jobs, but we also need to be practical and realistic, that if we don't address our character and our multidimensional fitness, we are not going to function at the highest peak. And also we're going to burn out. We're not going to be happy. So I like practical solutions. And so that's why I put the curriculum in there, that if somebody just needs a place to start, they can use whatever they want. I have a website too, the flourishinglawyer.org. Where I put everything. Some of the articles that I've written are now behind a paywall, which I'm kind of annoyed about, to be honest with you, because I want them to be free. But I don't have control over that. So if anybody ever needs a link to something that you can't get because it's behind some other publisher's paywall, just let me know and I'll get permission to share it with you from them. But I'm kind of, as I feel like I overshare my personal stories in my book, so I'm an open book, to use that stupid pun or analogy. So that's why I'm like, anything that I've learned, I want to share with you. So you're welcome to use any of the resources that I cite.
Well, I am grateful. Our readers, I'm sure, are grateful for having it, and anybody listening to this later on will be grateful. And I've put on your email address and an area where people can actually download some of the information from the Flourishing Lawyer, as you said, the flourisinglawyer.org. And I specifically linked it to your bio page, which I think is just phenomenal, but the resources there are wonderful. And your NYLS email address is there as well. So at this point, I just wanted to send out a huge thank you, Heidi, for joining us this evening, and for those who are listening at a later time. I wanted to end by, again, thanking you for taking us through the highlights of your book, offering us ways to understand and understand the multi-dimensions that we have. And I'm going to use your own words to end, because in chapter 5, where you talk about the emotional dimension, you mentioned it earlier on, I thought, oh, she's talking about it, which I'm grateful for you to do so. You talk about positivity resonance, or the ability of two individuals to generate positive energy in one another and cause it to grow. We have all felt this evening. I know I felt the positivity from you, and know that it's going to carry me not just through tonight, but for some time afterwards. For anybody who's listening, I'm sure that they will be able to sense that positivity that you have. So that positivity resonance certainly was with us, and I'm forever grateful to you for joining us. I just wanted to, before we close and give you sort of the final word, remind you that our next career conversation is going to be on September the 26th with Justice Sandra Chapnick, who talks about being a mom, a teacher, a judge, a lawyer in her book Bold Decisions. So I'm looking forward to that. But for now, Heidi, any final closing words that you might have?
I am feeling the positivity resonance right back. So Gina, thank you. You made this really a fun hour and a half, and I'm grateful to everybody who listened and chimed in. So I appreciate all the notes in the chat too. And thank you so much. This made my whole year. So I appreciate
it. All the best to you, and good luck to your students. And thank you very much to Nassim, to Sandra, and to all who are joining us at this time as well. Have a really great evening, everyone. Thank you. Bye now. Oh, Nassim, I'm going to stop recording for a second.